Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Consciousness Collective podcast. I am your host, Leb, and today I have another special guest with me, Olivia of Viafrequency. Hi, Olivia.
Hello, hello. Thank you so much for having me, Leb. I know we had a quick conversation in the beginning, but I just wanted to echo this on air that I really appreciate being here. I've listened to both of your previous podcast episodes and connected on such a deep, resonant level with so many of the topics, and also the conversations that you had with Kate just really inspired me. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for that. I appreciate it. And you are somebody that I've always connected with your content, as we were just kind of discussing, that our interactions thus far have been just back and forth in each other's comments. And even like with that, like I could tell that there was a connection that we're able to resonate and that we kind of have, similar viewpoints. But the difference between that and just actually having a conversation can be really nice. And so it's a great opportunity for me as well. An honor and a pleasure, I should say.
Thank you. Definitely here too.
Wonderful. So let's start off with, why don't you tell a little bit about yourself, who you are, what you do, where people can find you.
Absolutely. So my name is Olivia. I'm an energy healer. I'm a Reiki master practitioner and a mentor in the holistic space. And I basically got into this entire realm, into this work, because I wanted to heal myself. And it took me a period of years to really better understand who I was and in relationship to the world and the collective and even this energetic structure that we live in. And this entire process of being exposed to some of these holistic modalities like Reiki and energy healing absolutely transformed my life. And I just can't echo that sentiment enough. And it sort of cultivated and created this passion in me over time that eventually got to a point where it was just bubbling up, and it it wanted to flow out. It wanted to be shared. It wanted to express. And I feel like ever since, I've sort of been nurturing that essence and trying to let it flow out and express into the collective however it most wants to, and that part of me. So this work, as it's transformed my own life, I've also seen it work magic in so many other people's lives. And it was also a pivotal moment for me when I became exposed to this work, because it sort of marked my own spiritual awakening and reintroduction to myself in so many different ways. And that's sort of how I ended up on YouTube. It's funny, prior to starting my YouTube channel, I actually was off social media for something like 7 years. I was completely unplugged from the world, if you will, in a number of ways, but definitely from a social media standpoint. But I got to a point where I just felt really called to share some of these things, and also to sort of use my experience as a catalyst, and also to connect with like-minded people. That was another huge aspect of me coming online and starting my own platform, because I'm still finding my tribe. Like, I'm still out here finding my people, connecting with people that really truly resonate on a soul level. And that's something that was very much missing in my life for so long. So it's been an amazing experience. It's all been sort of based on my own life experience. And that's always sort of what I um, aim to learn from on a daily basis and share. And so, yeah, you can find me on my YouTube channel at Via Frequency. I am also on TikTok. I post over there daily on TikTok at Via Frequency. And I basically do long and short form energy healing sessions. And starting this year, I'm going to be doing a lot more topic and discussion videos too. So I'm always just sort of trying to follow my own creative flow, but you could definitely find me on either space. And hopefully in the future, I'll also be expanding to some others, but I'm not quite there yet.
Excellent. Yeah, it kind of takes its time to unfold. I love what you touched on, part of the process. Like, for so many people that are in the healing, the coaching, the just whatever industry or whatever you might want to call it, that it starts from our own personal healing journeys. And I think that, I mean, and especially with your videos, even when they're just, non-talking Reiki videos, your authenticity shows through. And it is something that just it's a natural part of the process as we learn to kind of heal ourselves and get more in touch with who we are on a deeper level. There is that empowerment that, yes, can lead to spiritual egotism and like, hey, I'm more spiritual than you, that kind of thing. But more than anything, it leads to wanting to share and wanting to help others that are going through similar struggles, and to see that express and unfold authentically is always just beautiful to see. There's just always unique journeys to getting there. Everybody starts from, has their own path. And so many of the people that I've talked to, there's a little, shall we say, hate that happens around the love and light community. But something that I don't think that those people understand is to get to that place takes a lot of going through your own darkness, your own personal hell to bring it into love and light.
100%. Absolutely.
Uh, yeah, because I know that you've had your struggles in the podcast that you did recently, and I'm actually, if you will, I am forgetting the gentleman's name.
Oh, absolutely. His name is Tim Cooley. And he's a musician. The podcast itself is called the Tim Cooley Free Music Podcast. So it's on his YouTube channel. It's also on several other podcast platforms, but you can definitely check that out too. But he's a great resource for music and also podcast conversation sort of like this. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually saw that and I was kind of going, I need some intro music.
Oh,
Huh.
no, he's
Um,
like the best place to go. I found him very early on in my YouTube journey because, as you know, I use background music in all of my videos, and I really struggled with that for a long time. So I'm always looking for nice niche music that just happens to fit into my sessions. So yeah, if you're ever looking for music, he's a great resource, and he's so generous to content creators too. It's awesome.
yeah, I know. I liked his vibe and the way that he was able to just flow with
Mm.
the subjects that you were bringing up. I mean, because you were getting into energy work, and he's a musician, and it was really neat to see. Yeah, all right. I'm at a point I'm noticing how much I'm saying. That always gets to me. I might
Oh my gosh, when
edit
I
this part.
listened to the podcast back, I was like, oh my gosh, I've never done a podcast before. This is my first time. Let me tell you, it is quite an experience. And it's an experience not only to have a conversation on through a phone with someone miles and miles away, but also then to perceive yourself in the conversation afterward and realize your vocal tendencies and misnomers and this and that. I definitely realized the the likes, several things. So, and I noticed also this is funny. I was thinking about this earlier today. This did not come naturally to me, but I didn't realize that when you're speaking to someone on a podcast, if you respond to them while they're speaking, it sort of sounds like you're interrupting them. And my brain didn't register that. So I had no intention of interrupting anybody, but now I realize that, oh no, I'm just going to keep it zipped until until it's my turn.
I totally get that. It's a funny thing about recording. Like when one person starts talking, it kind of like clips out the other one. So I even am a little bit careful of like when I laugh, I kind of keep it in so it doesn't just cut out whatever they are saying. We were talking a little bit before about the name it to claim it, or name it to tame it, not claim it, tame it. My, which is kind of what we're doing here. The way that it came about was I let you know that we haven't had much conversation directly, and I'm a little bit nervous about that.
Mhm.
And it led into just a wonderful little conversation. And like I said, I wished we had recorded, but there is so much there that comes up in healing and using your own voice. That whole, the throat chakra work, becomes very important when you start being able to get a message out there. Is that something that you have kind of experienced, wrestled with? How have you come to grips with that, I suppose? How have I believe you know what I'm trying to ask.
Definitely. And first of all, I just want to say that I love that you brought up this topic again and revisited it from our conversation prior, because I think this is a great example of expressing vulnerability and connection and just the humanity in each and every one of us. Because I think that we all have probably had an experience where we're nervous before speaking with someone, or I know that that's a huge thing for me. And it always has been, because one of my, I'd say, most pivotal wounds that I have worked through and that I continue to work through in my own journey is the wound of my throat chakra and coming into my voice. So, first of all, I just love that we revisited that. And I'm happy to replicate our conversation a little bit and also take it into my own experience. But I also love the term name it to tame it. I've never heard that before. I don't know if that's a thing or
I don't know. Somebody said it to me at one point, and so I've just kind of like, oh yeah, I like it.
I love that. Um, yeah. So for me personally, especially coming onto social media and being behind a camera and doing this in sort of a public arena, that was probably the biggest thing that I took years and years to work through. I mean, I had the calling to show up in more of a public space on social media many years before I did. This wasn't just something that came natural to me. Although I do have a very performative part of my humanity here, in that, like, my sun sign is a Leo. I definitely enjoy, it's one of my values. Like, performance to a degree is definitely one of my values, and it took me a long time to realize that. But the challenge in the way of that was that my voice had so deeply been wounded over the years. And I also think that I just came into this experience sort of struggling to express myself fully. Um, and I always carried some level of shame around my voice. I always carried some level of fear of expression. And I can definitely trace this back to certain things, but I also just look at my makeup and the way that I sort of present. I've always been, I touched on this a little bit with Tim, but I've always been very different, like, from the social norm, and I've never really fit into the box. So I felt like my entire life, for years and years and years, I was like a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. Like, I spent my entire life, up to a certain point in my early adulthood, was when I really first began to fully embrace and accept myself. But I spent so long just trying to cover up this truth within me, trying to cover up the way I showed up in the world, trying to cover up my natural essence and expression and energy. And I also, now that I'm sort of fleshing this out with you and speaking out loud, I'm also realizing the amount of shame that I carried around even struggling with that issue. So there's a little bit of a differentiation there. It's not even just the shame, or it's not even necessarily was just the fear of using my voice, but it was also this feeling so different and, like, isolated from maybe a social acceptance or collective experiences, that I also felt that I had to act like it was super easy for me and never truly be honest and open and vulnerable about how difficult and how much of a challenge this basically dictated my entire life. So it's so interesting that you zeroed in on this topic and that it ended up being your first question. And I feel like it's by no mistake. because this has been a core issue for me. And it's something that I continue to work through. It's something that at one point I wasn't using my voice at all, barely. And when I was, it was so decorated to the degree where I was just trying to appease the other individual or to fit into a certain space, as opposed to ever just letting my truth and my essence and my own unique energy express it all. So that's been a huge, huge unfolding in my life.
So true. And you're not alone there. I mean, I struggle with that every time I edit a video, quite honestly. It's like,
Mhm.
am I really? Yep, like this is where I'm going. And as you were talking, like, I was pondering on, do you think it's a societal thing that is kind of imposed on us? Like, there is it a personal judgment thing that we feel like we need to keep ourselves small or to fit in? Or is that kind of like, I just feel that it is so pervasive in society, like it is all over the place, that we're just supposed to fit in the little box. We're supposed to be, round peg, round hole. And I think the more that people wake up, the more that we are seeing that that's not doing us any favors. It's keeping us in patterns and in aspects where we give our power away. We shrink ourselves down. And a lot of, like, what is kind of at the root of it, or what feels like it's at the root of it for me, is a kind of a fear of taking up space. A fear of being big and saying, "Hey, I'm here." And yet at the same time, I think we all have that little need to be seen. So it creates this imbalance, this internal struggle, this duality that goes on, that of like, I know that I have something to offer, but what if people see me?
Absolutely.
It's, and it's a difficult thing. It is just, even in doing this, doing what we both do, posting on videos, or even just standing up for your beliefs to your family, to your friends, to just outwardly. Again, that throat chakra, that expressing your true self. And how do we help people through that? I just always find it interesting that in the collective there are so many common themes that we deal with, right? Common struggles, and it always expresses itself in its own way, because of course we are all unique, but it also points to kind of the interconnectivity that we all have, that we have these difficulties expressing, difficulties finding that self-confidence. It really goes along with, to me, it's why I like the chakra system so much, because it kind of compartmentalizes where the different issues can be in the different aspects that way. I'm assuming it's something you probably see in your clients as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So as you're speaking now, I'm sort of just getting almost chills because this conversation is so in alignment. I think it's in alignment for just tapping into the consciousness of our own journeys, but also in the collective right now, because I think so many people are maybe feeling that call to bring something or share something or have something channel and express through them, but they may not either know where to start. They may feel fear of judgment. They may feel that their family and friends will think they're silly. And I just want to say, first of all of those things apply to my journey for sure. And I think it's a couple things I just want to touch on that you said. I think that for so long, we have been at the mercy of this societal programming that sort of expects everyone to fall in line and fit into a certain box. And I actually the timing is uncanny. I just wrote an email about this, and I was talking about this concept of the new normal, how we're moving into a new space and in time where authenticity is going to be the golden standard and authenticity is going to be the new normal. Richness of expression is going to be the new normal. The barriers and the confines and the constraints that have kept our unique individuated perspectives in a chokehold for so long are going to fall away. And we're sort of in the very early stages of that, or sort of in this transitionary period. I feel like there's a lot of us out here now talking about the importance and the frequency of authenticity, and also promoting more acceptance for however a person shows up or expresses, or even where you're at in your journey right now. I think that society has this way of shaping us into these cookie cutter puzzle piece, perfect uniform clones almost, that leave no room for true expression and also for just that divinity to even express itself, because it's so cut off by all of the expectations and the fears. And I think shame is a really pervasive one too, because if we trace all of this back years and years and years to our childhoods, I think that eventually we will find some experience or a set of experiences, or perhaps for you, it's a family dynamic or a school dynamic or all of the above. Because I find that typically when a person struggles with a certain issue, it tends to express in more than one arena and sort of cyclically becomes like this cyclical traumatic imprint. But if we trace it back, I think that there's this question that comes up, and or at least a characterization. And it's the statement of, when did I decide that I wasn't okay? Or when did it stop being okay for me to be myself? When did it stop being okay for me to use my voice? When did I start tailoring my expression to fit the needs or the expectations or the judgments of the audience? I think that's one of the most painful places to be too, because it implies that there's something wrong with who you are. There's something wrong with the way that you show up and what you came here to offer the world, the mark that you came to make. Maybe you know you're supposed to do something, but it feels so incredibly either impossible or unrealistic, or like the barriers for entry, or even the issues that would lead up to the actual actualization of that would just be too painful to even take it on. So I honestly feel that the first and most important thing, and I feel like this is what we do as energy healers, this is what we do as coaches, this is what we do in whatever title you may wear in the spiritual community. If you're working with people, if you're working one-on-one, even if you're creating courses, whatever it may be, there is a certain element of holding space that you're doing for a person. And I almost feel that the holding space is just as important as the actual alchemy that's occurring, let's say, in your modality, because I think it's a part of that alchemy, if that makes sense.
I 100% agree. And in fact, that's, I mean, something that I like to say that I pride myself on is my ability to hold space.
Mm.
And that largely comes from my own experiences. I dealt with depression,
Mm.
severe depression for the majority of my life. And that, to the point that it got about as dark as it can go. We'll put it that way.
Oh, me too.
But one of the things that I've realize there. And of course, now with that being such a part of my journey, I have a lot of people that are going through that come to me. We kind of, attract the people that we resonate with. That the biggest thing about depression is that people just want to be seen for where they are. It's like when somebody is struggling on that level and they actually do, reach out. The first thing that a lot of people will try to do, oh, keep your head up, like it'll get better. Don't worry, blah, blah, blah. And although those intentions are good, you're trying to cheer somebody up to bring them out of the space. At the same time, from that perspective, it's invalidating, because it's not holding the space for that person to be seen and just simply to understand that, for that person to have somebody else understand where they are and where that struggle is and just how hard it is.
Okay.
And as you were saying, I think that is so much like that is a crucial first step in any alchemizing, is to validate where you are right now. Because you can't start anywhere else.
That just resonates for me so much. And I can feel your ability to hold space just in this conversation. Like I can really sense that. And I think sometimes we struggle to find context for why we go through the things we do, or why we have these experiences that may take us to the absolute darkest depths of our being. And I've been there. I mean, the places and the spaces that I have traveled to in my lifetime with depression and anxiety and all of these labels that we put on suffering basically have been very deep and very dark. And I feel that going through something like that almost opens this ability within us to hold that space, and also just to refine our ability for empathy. I think that empathy is sort of one of those words that's either really loved or really dirty in the spiritual community, depending on what frame of mind you're looking from. But I think in essence, the ability to attune to a person and to really be present with them and to open yourself up to understanding what they've been to on deep level, not just on a superficial level, but to take a couple moments to walk in their shoes and really grasp where they're coming from. Not everybody has the experiences or the capacity yet in their life experience to do that. But I feel like what you spoke about with your experience, that's almost the training ground for holding space in a way. That's almost the experiences that open that ability in people. So I think a lot of times we go through things to direct us toward our purpose or toward our dharma in life, or even just to enrich our expression and be able to guide us in a certain direction and allow us to understand where we're truly supposed to be going with something. I also think that given those experiences, people who are coming out and being more authentic and being more vulnerable are almost trailblazing the changes in society right now. Because if we as people don't show up real, if we don't show up vulnerable, if we don't show up raw, we're not helping the people that we're wanting to help, or we're not reaching the people who may need to hear and understand. Because I think there's a certain presentation too, and we've all been indoctrinated with this, like in celebrity culture and stuff, but there's this barrier almost of either perfection or an unrealistic nature, even the way we're marketed to for the past however many years in society. And I think that showing up and actually bearing your soul and talking about your deepest struggles. And even, when you're on TikTok and you're channeling your guides or channeling even past experiences, pulling from the things that you've been through and the experiences that you've come from, I think there's something so transformative about that for the nature of where we're going as a collective in itself. So yeah, I just really resonated with everything you said. I'm not sure if there was a question there or if.
I don't know either. Um, yeah, and it is a very, transformative experience. And I think one thing, like why it is so powerful, is that everybody has those things that they hide, that we are so trained to just have that perfect mask on and everything's happy go lucky and it's all love and light, right? All that kind of stuff. But again, that, invalidates the duality of the experience. And you were saying something there that, like, in that experience you were kind of wondering, like, what's the point of going through this. And in my, from my experience, my story, like, there there is a point, but the fruit of that isn't to be seen, and that's not what you need to worry about when you're in that experience. The point of having the experience is having the experience. And the judgments that we place on ourselves, the shame, the guilt, the, like, I I feel bad for feeling bad, right?
Mhm.
We feel that, and then we try to detach from that experience, and we don't get the depth of the experience in there. And yeah, so in my coaching and what I do when I am helping people, one of the biggest things is just dropping the self judgments for where you are. The whole, it's okay to not be okay. Like, that's fine. And again, that kind of comes back to the holding space and allowing people to be seen where they are. And just that idea, I think, absolutely terrifies so much of greater society. Uh, those that are, I mean, that we may see and we just can identify that they are wrapped up in their fears and their programmings, and they are so unaware of who they are at core that anything getting close to that, is can feel life threatening, quite honestly. One thing that I like to say is the smaller box that you live in, the scarier the world outside of that is. As we've seen in society, they try to keep us in these nice little boxes of, like, this is what's acceptable, this is, how you're supposed to be, blah blah blah. And the more that you conform to that, when you see something, you know, oh my gosh, there's a man crying in public, like, we instantly, these judgments come up, or these fears of, like, I could never do that, or I feel bad for that guy, or, you know, um, so I think, again, the more that we can show the commonality of those experiences, the more that we can, well, be holding safe space for more people to wake up. Here's a question for you. When you run into people, maybe in your comments, I don't know if you've done any lives and having chats in your, as you're doing a live broadcast, but when you run into, the haters, the people that are, again, from our perspective, that are too afraid to see themselves at a depth, or to admit that there are things outside of their small circle of understanding. Um, I think that how we deal with that is going to be very important as we kind of continue to wake up society, build the new earth, whatever we want to look at it that way. Do you have anything in particular that you like to use? Any methods? What does it bring up in you, within you, and how do you? respond?
Yeah, so this is something that has definitely evolved for me over time, and it's, I guess, always evolving. So I have not done like a TikTok live or anything like that. That's something that I should probably figure out how to do all that. So that I'm going to hold myself to that being the next evolution there. But I definitely get negativity in my comments. I definitely get judgmental comments and hater type comments. And it's interesting. In the very beginning, when I first came online, I think I felt like I needed to write this long summation or justification as to not anything mean, or like I've never gone back and forth with a person or like fought them with fire or anything like that. Just because I've always tried to keep it, pretty cordial and but I think in the beginning there was definitely a part of me that needed to explain myself or justify myself. And as I really think about this, I'm recognizing that that was some type of need within myself that was fleshing itself out and being shown, and also asking to be met. Maybe it was a need for validation or for acceptance, but I think that I was probably a lot more long-winded in my responses and trying to justify something or create some sort of, you know, now when I approach it, I either completely ignore the comment, which is something that I do sometimes, or I tend to get people that will leave more than one inappropriate comment in a row. Like it tends to be a thing. I've noticed that theme. And for a little while, like I figured, okay, I'm just gonna not make the statement at all. But then I started to realize that I could make the statement. I could set my own boundary and set my own expectations in the comment section for myself, but I don't have to write some long summation about it. I don't have to go into detail. I can just, it's almost like this is not exactly, but it's almost like that saying no is a complete sentence. It's like the essence of that. I can just state my boundary and I don't have to explain it. So I think that that's how I try to approach very hateful comments or something where someone's just trying to get a response from you or work you up. There are comments that come up that definitely trigger me once in a while. Like I'm totally human. And there's certain things that I'm just like, really? And I think the I think the measure of the growth in that area too is how quickly I can bounce back from that when it happens as a content creator, because we're we put ourselves out there to a degree where we're always going to get someone who touches on some chord or string that maybe has a deeper resonance within us or leads us right back to something mom or dad said or a trigger growing up or something like that. But I really, at this point, what I try to do is to set my boundary, to be honest about how I feel. Like sometimes I think even being vulnerable with those types of people can be a really effective tool, because whether or not they're understanding the message, other people might understand the message. And there's also something healing about setting the boundary or saying what needs to be said. So I think I'm really thoughtful about how I respond to things nowadays. Not that I wasn't in the past. I just really try to be intentional about every response. And I'm also thinking about, this is sort of how my brain operates. It's like pulling up something that you just said that I wanted to touch on too, because this is really interesting. sometimes I like really want to say something different in the comments, but like I can't think of the perfect like not that it needs to be perfect, but I just can't think of exactly how I want to express it. So I'm even realizing the shift in myself when I go to respond to a comment. Like, for example, a lot of times I'll say, have a great day or this and this and this. But lately I'm getting this almost an even deeper level of presence for whatever people are experiencing, like you just talked about before, that I'm starting to feel this impulse to change the language that I use, even in very not intimate encounters, like just very quick encounters online. I guess I'm just trying to speak to the level of intention that I try to put into the comment, because even when a person, like, for example, comes to an energy healing video, they may be going through the worst. They may be there because their current reality is falling apart at the seams. And it dawned on me recently that by me simply saying something like, oh, have an awesome day or something like that, although that's really my wish for them, it may be dismissive of where they're at. So this is a constantly evolving process for me that I'm constantly learning and changing the way that I respond to people. And I think that it's just based on a deeper understanding and ability to hold space and the way that I would want somebody to respond to me, given all of the possibilities and circumstances. And also realizing that it's not my job to be able to judge that for everybody. But the bottom line is it's different in every experience. It's different in every encounter, but there have been some definite changes and evolutions and lessons that I've been learning in that area too. How about you?
Well, my methodology has definitely evolved. I mean, at one point years ago in my life, I would get on the internet to start arguments.
Mm,
I was kind of one of those people, right? But there is like I see it a lot differently now, and it kind of depends on it's very subjective. It depends on the situation, the context, what is going on. Like if there is something that is directly hateful, specifically towards somebody or a group that might be in my community, that I am going to, I'm just going to stop, because that's, one of my things is protecting those around me from the judgment, from the divisiveness, you know, like you can just tell when the difference when people are viewing others as outside from self, of something that they can make to feel less than so that they feel greater than. And that, is something that I address in various ways. So there's another side of how I handle things. One thing is that I am a reflector
mm.
in human design,
I
and
I
so
heard that. Yeah.
yeah, so one of the gifts of that is I get very good at showing people what they are putting out. Now, of course, I have to be a little bit careful with that in the case of people spewing hate, that kind of thing, because that's not something that I want to reciprocate, to build on. Like, I don't just throw it back at them, because that's not helping at all. What I generally try to offer, okay, so there's another piece of this, is that for lives and such, I moderate for a lot of people.
Mm.
Like I am a moderator for at least 15, 16 different creators on TikTok alone. So there's a part of it when people come into those lives, most of those creators, like they're all healers, psychics, readers, actually there's a musician or two. They aren't the type to just instantly block or ban somebody,
Mhm.
you know. And so what I will generally do is I um put myself in between the person that is, coming in with either hateful or just disruptive comments, even, and be like, hey, nope, come over here. let me be the focus for a minute and let me kind of give you some chances. And I've learned to like set boundaries, very immediately of like somebody comes in this gosh, what's a good example? Even just with politics. So a lot of the streams that I moderate for, we don't talk about politics because it's too divisive. So when somebody comes in making a very directly political statement, I will just simply say, "Hey, I appreciate you have that viewpoint, but this is not the place to be discussing these things." And I will set that boundary and then watch from there. Uh, One of my favorite things to do, do you know the emoji that's just the eyes like looking?
I know
Like I
exactly.
think it's supposed to be like rolling your eyes, but just the two big eyes.
Mhm.
They come in and they say something, I just tag their name and then put those eyes just looking straight at them. Maybe a question mark, like, would you like to clarify? Here's your opportunity because I'm watching. And what is wonderful is there are times that I will have those people come in and I will be able to speak to them and they go, "Oh, that's what's going on here. Like, this isn't necessarily a place to come in and try to prove that you're right. This is a place for open mindedness and for acceptance." And it is a beautiful thing to actually see that shift as it happens. There's a couple people in my community that started off as haters, essentially. And I just kind of started talking. I was like, okay, cool. Let's go with this. Where are we? What are you trying to say here? Where's this coming from? But they're now regular part of the community. So I love giving people that chance and kind of trying to help people understand what they're coming into and just how the energy that they're bringing isn't appropriate.
Mhm.
It's just not space for that. And I think it's part of the gift of being a reflector or even just an empath of being able to tune that message in a way that somebody can understand, like from that space. Because although, like, yes, the community is to be protected and like I am against divisiveness, it's why I don't like to approach political issues directly because politics, like, yes, there are big things that need to be talked about, but the way that it is approached is I'm right, you're wrong, this is good, that's bad. The whole dualistic two-party system, and that doesn't do anybody any favors, right? Um, I'm realizing I'm on a little bit of a ramble here, and I'm not quite sure where I was going with it, but we're getting there. But I do still think it's important to allow and acknowledge that, like, because that comes from somewhere. And yes, it's not something that I want to promote. Like I say, the divisiveness, the or as I like to say, individuation versus as opposed to unification. I want to go towards unifying, but at the same time, it's a valid experience. And so for me, it can be a very difficult line to walk. Like, okay, if I hate the haters, what does that make me? Right? So to kind of see those perspectives. But I guess the other side of things, something that you said about it brought up something for me that when those things trigger you and somebody comes in and says just that right thing, like, oh, that's just like mom used to say, right? Like, that's a gift.
Mm-hmm.
That is an opportunity to look within. I mean, one of my favorite things to say is a trigger or being triggered is an opportunity to examine why that trigger is there. Because if you are, in that perfectly healed and strong in your space, standing within your own power, what other people say it doesn't matter. Like whatever, you're still yourself. So when it does matter to you, that's an opportunity to be like, well, why did that hurt? Hold on. What am I owning there that, is touching on a core wounding. So it's an amazing opportunity. Like I love being around people that are supportive of, or that are like-minded, I guess I should say, that it kind of becomes an echo chamber. And social medias can be very building of that.
Mhm.
You know, you go around and you see a bunch of the people that like the same things, and so you're kind of on the same wavelength, and that's great. That's wonderful. It helps you kind of stand and build confidence in there. But if it's never challenged, if it's never like opposed, in some way, there's a limit to how much it can grow. It's like you have to have the darkness and the light. You have to have the duality. You have to have something to push against and something that you want to go towards, the positive and negative. And I think that is going to be a big challenge as we are trying to build into the new, to step into a collective consciousness, to reinvent systems that no longer serve us. We have to understand, why are people holding on to those systems so tightly? You I think that's one of the biggest like collective challenges to address.
Yeah, totally. I loved what you just said. So many elements of what you just said. They even allow me to segue into certain things that I couldn't quite gather earlier. And in essence, your approach that you take with people is exactly what I try to do with people too now. And it's so fun, like negative comments and stuff like that, or just
Yeah.
competitive people, aggressive people, or anything like that. You just had a really great, succinct way to dial it down. But I love your approach. And I think there's something so beautiful about making that transformation in a person and being able to witness somebody who's coming in with an agenda or an attachment, or somebody who's coming in with their shield on and their spear ready to go to combat, and something that you're able to come in, a seed you're able to plant, and you're actually even able to see it nurtured and grown to the point where they end up on the other side. I mean, that to me is priceless. Those moments are amazing. And not only just in the comment section, but in life. Like whenever you're dealing with a conflict or something, and you're able to reflect something deeper about the situation, or reflect something deeper about themselves, or illuminate something within them that they can't see because they're blinded by their own shadow or something of that nature, but to where there's a harmony and a coherence that can come out of it. I mean, that's a beautiful experience. And I think that you, being a reflector, probably have this incredibly innate gift of being able to reflect shadow to other people and have them be able to better understand and alchemize their unconscious material. I think that's probably super innate into your imprint. And I think that's a perfect example of it. I think that's a perfect example of it. I don't meet many reflectors. So are they the smallest percentage of
Yeah,
human?
it's the 1%.
It's 1%. Okay, that's what I thought. I'm a manifester. So um when I hear
I
reflect,
actually don't meet many
oh,
manifestors.
what'd you say?
I said I actually don't meet many manifestors.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think manifestors are like maybe 8 or 9%, maybe
yep.
something like that. I don't know off the top of my head, but when I meet a reflector, I'm like, oh, I want to meet you because it's so interesting to me, just because they're rare. You carry such a rare imprint, and you come with such an energetic purpose and differentiation and an individuated perspective that's so unique, that is really, it's just really cool to talk to you and bounce ideas off of you. I also just wanted to mention that in this conversation, I was, and this was also coming up a little bit earlier, in the conversation, but I didn't quite get to it. The discussion of the light and the or the light and the dark, and this sort of dualistic war between both sides, and especially in our community, even the term light worker, it can polarize people, or it can trigger people, or people can gravitate toward it so much that they perhaps disregard their shadow or their darkness, or they try to um not look at that stuff, perhaps because they don't have the full understanding. But I loved what you said earlier, because there would have been a point on my journey where I wouldn't have even been comfortable calling myself a light worker, because I didn't fully understand. And I think this is key, because I think in the spiritual community, there's a lot of terms that are used, but they hold such depth that the surface and the superficial can never cover the truth of them. And I think that there's a lot of contextual projections put onto certain terms where the deeper meaning isn't always understood and fully comprehended. So there would have been a point on my journey before I fully, or not fully, obviously, but better understood a lot of the nuance in these terms and a lot of what goes into it. I would have said, no, I can't call myself a light worker. Like I work with a lot of these more difficult energies. I'm a shadow worker. I don't know what I would have called myself, but I loved what you said, that for a person to truly call themselves, or, identify that way, it involves diving into the shadows. It involves confronting the other end of the spectrum with such a depth and such almost a boldness, a willingness, and an ability to travel through those less traveled roads, and to truly confront the unconscious and the subconscious and those patterns that show up, but the ones that we don't like to look at, and the ones that um, we may shy away from, or at least publicly. And I think that the ability to truly visit those arenas, and also what you were saying about holding space, even with another person, to fully sit with a person and encourage them and allow them to experience their own unconsciousness, their own unconscious, subconscious material, their own shadow. There's nothing else like that. And it definitely takes a certain level of allowing and even surrender and willingness to sort of get your hands dirty. I honestly think that the fear is that if people go into those things, they're never going to come out of them. Or if they hold space for those deep emotions and beliefs and very real experiences, they're almost going to be consumed by them. They're going to get sucked up and spit out somehow, and unable to return to a state of normality, or a state of creation or anything. But that's truly where that transformation occurs. So I just love that distinction that you made earlier, saying that just because somebody calls themselves a light worker or puts any sort of label or term on them, it doesn't mean that that they're being negligent toward, or that it's not a denial of darkness. It's not a suppression of something. It may in fact mean that they've actually traveled through those roads very well and come out in this space where they're able to then illuminate those things for other people, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. The saying, I had to write it down to remind myself, but one thing kind of kept on coming to mind as you were speaking, is that a tree cannot have its branches in heaven without having its roots in hell.
Mm,
As in, you have to be rooted down just as far as you are going to go up, because I mean, we're the middle point. We really are. And I think that even the what you were talking about how some people are afraid to even hold space for somebody in, the depths of darkness. Right there, fear is showing you a piece, another part of your own healing that is missing. If you're afraid to go there with somebody, well, are you trying to deny or invalidate that experience? Do you see too much of it in yourself that you don't want to admit is there? And like, I think that's a very real fear, because as somebody who, I mean, I was stuck there for a long time, to the point that I tried to leave
Mm-hmm.
this realm.
I hear you.
and and what I like to say, because so like there's definitely a risk there, right? And admittedly, I have kind of a different understanding of all of that and how it works. But what I got out of it, again, another one of my favorite little sayings is, I had to live in the dark long enough to find that I'm the light, that the light's within. And if you don't give yourself the opportunity to sit in that darkness that is there, you don't get to see just how much that holds on. How much that light has the opportunity to, well, illuminate that shadow, that darkness. So you mentioned about labels, and like you were using the term light worker, and how those things, and even you mentioned empath earlier, and how those things can be almost divisive within the spiritual community, which bothers me a little bit, right? That there is divisiveness within the spiritual community, because in my personal perspective, what spirituality is about is bringing yourself into unity with yourself, and realizing how you are one part of a greater whole, of how it is all valid experiences. But people get so stuck on labels sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
And like there is definitely power to words, but a lot of that power is within the definition that each individual person gives to them. And so when we have terms that honestly start getting thrown around, blanket broad terms of either it being an empath or being a light worker, being a healer, people holding on to specific definitions of what that is or what that needs to look like, uh, can just miss the point, or like the actual idea that is behind the words, the concept that word symbolizes. And that's just always it's always an interesting point for me. I like to bring up the example of twin flames, right? Everybody's heard of twin flames, at least everybody in the spiritual community. I say everybody, I don't like to be all whatever. Most of us have heard about twin flame.
Yeah. I think most people probably have at this point, right?
I would think so. But if you start talking to different people about it, there are so many different ideas of what a twin flame is. And even like I know this for a fact, that somebody is going to be listening to this and go, well, I know what a twin flame is. I know the right definition. It's like, you have a definition, but somebody else might have a different one. And just, it's something that I don't know how to get around sometimes. And also why I try to, like, I've started keeping those terms out of my vernacular, out of my lexicon, whatever, because we're getting divisiveness over little things
Mhm.
of, call yourself a light worker or not. Are you trying to bring goodness, love, unity into the collective? Awesome. You can decide your title. Like, I don't care at this point. Uh, I don't know. So that's just an interesting point. It also leaves me in a place of not knowing how to refer to people,
Mhm.
or like, whenever I'm saying like the people that I want to have on here. Well, I want to have, let's see, light workers, empath readers, energy workers, practitioners. What, I don't know, like anywhere in that range, like is, the people that I have on. So it's always been a little bit an interesting point there. There was one other thing you brought up. Well, I brought up the reflector thing, but you gave your perspective on that. It's a blessing and a curse.
Oh, yes.
It, it's it's difficult, and I'm glad that I've been able to awaken to it a little bit more and be aware of it. I don't let it identify me, but I see how that kind of blueprint affects, and I think that a lot of people can relate to it on some level because the way that I look at it is it's kind of like uber empath or like like I've just got that dial turned to 11, and yeah, it was a struggle because for the longest time, I mean, I had no concept of who am I,
Oh my
right?
gosh.
Like, which, yep, something everybody can kind of relate to, I think. Uh, but realizing that I am just constantly sampling, and even now, like as I've gone through more healing work and as I can approach that like consciously with that framework in my mind of what a reflector is, one thing that I see is that I do my best to be authentic in my interactions in what I do, right? But at the same time, I can recognize that everybody that I talk to gets a little different flavor of me. Like I am still being true, but how it comes out, how the messages are, just how I communicate changes. My body language changes. And the, there's one creator on TikTok who is a reflector who specializes in human design, and his name's Reiki Marco. And he said, I asked him, a little bit like, can you give me a little more advice on being a reflector? And the thing that he said was what made him like, what was the biggest shift for him is he gave up trying to figure out who he is. And I love his advice. I love his content. And he seems like he is genuinely a strong, confident reflector. But hearing that, there's like, I can understand that. It also it kind of hurts, you know? I mean, like what we were talking about earlier of like learning to stand in your own power, to speak your voice, to take up space. Like it's there, but my space changes depending on who I'm around is
Mhm.
interesting way to perceive it.
I can really imagine, and I also relate to that on several levels, just because your experience in terms of the absorption of energy or the like you called yourself an uber empath. I really like that too. I couldn't find a better name for myself, especially growing up. I truly believe that I came in like very, very sensitive. And speaking from like a modern psychological standpoint, I guess there's this concept of this scale of sensitivity that kids come in on. They say that, some come in very, very sensitive, highly sensitive, some come in a little bit less sensitive, maybe a different level of veil to some standpoint. I'm just speaking from that perspective, but it's an
Yeah.
idea. It's an idea. Then I think that the trauma and the dynamics that I experienced growing up also led that sensitivity to just, I mean, I can't think of a better term than uber empath at that point, because I have always been so incredibly sensitive. And for a lot of my life, it was incredibly detrimental too. I mean, I could not turn it on or off. And I think that I was always probably just like a sponge, and to the point where I knew nothing about energetics at that point. And these things, in addition to my own trauma and wounds and the trauma of just experiencing that, manifested in my body physically. So I think that like empathy is one of the most important concepts, I think, of this time and this expansion of consciousness that we're all experiencing, because our society is incredibly narcissistic. But I think that without just the ability to set boundaries as a person, and also an understanding of individuation and how that actually occurs. And I think that can be a really helpful perspective too for people like you and me, because the way that I've more often than not experienced the world in my life is that there was no boundary between me and other. And I think there was a lot of enmeshment between me and everybody else in my life. So I think that that natural individuation from a human perspective, obviously from a spiritual perspective, there's no true individuality, or but I do believe that we come here to have an experience, and we do come here to create our own avatar, our own personality. And that's not the enemy, that's an experience to be embraced and to be allowed and cultivated. So basically, in essence, I'm just saying that from the empathy perspective, I'm really related to what you said. And I think that it's definitely a gift and a curse. And it's something that people with that level of sensitivity definitely have to work with, because that's wholeheartedly been my experience. And to be perfectly honest, it's still my experience. I continue to evolve the way that I relate to the way that I relate to myself, and the way that I work with my own field in relation to the fields of other people. This is a constantly evolving process. And I think that's okay. I think that we're always learning. And now I'm trying to remember what your question was, but it's slipping my mind. Or was
Well, uh,
there was something
no,
I really wanted to touch on too.
I really liked where you went with it.
Thank
Uh, in that it is, I mean, it is part of that experience and the whole like the individuation, the unification, and
you.
that dynamic. Uh, that there is. Oh, hey, I just had a little realization of in what you were talking about, how that uh, those highly sensitive people, or empathic, or again, however you want to label it, there is less of that individuation, and like they are just naturally more experiencing that unification. So that's part of the challenge of that experience, is to allow yourself to see that how you are still an individual, beautiful single piece of the collective. Yeah. So just the like I love that perspective that you brought, that it is having a little bit less of that boundary between individuation. And in a way, that is what I think we are evolving towards when we talk about like going towards a collective consciousness. But at the same time, you know, the the important part of it, is that we are all bringing individual perspectives to that collective consciousness. So finding that balance, again, it kind of comes into that duality of, finding the individual perspective and how that fits and relates to the whole. And it's a wonderful process of enmeshment, really, with both self and other.
Absolutely. That's such a great way to put it. Because by individuating, and I think you touched on this in either your first podcast or the one with Kate, because I'm remembering you talk about this, but it's the greater whole learning about itself through infinite, unique perspectives. So I think honoring that uniqueness and honoring that path, even if it's really, really difficult, there's something in there that is meant to be nurtured and grown and learned from and cultivated typically. And now I remember what I was forgetting just a second ago: labels. I just wanted to touch on that too and echo what you said. Labels are incredibly difficult, and it's something that I've shied away from a lot too, not because like I don't feel comfortable using them, but just because everybody has a different definition of these things. I think that labels can also be leveraged in the spiritual community from a marketing standpoint too,
Yes.
right? So there's, I think sometimes a fine line between something that's necessarily a teaching or a marketing. I think that marketing, the essence of marketing is polarization. I think that good marketing typically polarizes people, right? So I often think that, especially in this environment of social media and in this world that we live in now, where almost everything is digitalized and so many people are bringing their businesses online, they're trying to learn how to be seen, how to market themselves, and how to be perceived in an effective way, which I completely agree with. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think that those terms in that process can be weaponized a little bit. And
Hmm.
even more so, I think they can be the source of some great confusion, because I truly don't believe that all the people who are absorbing, and I just use myself as an example, I could take many of these terms. When I was first learning about them, I had assumptions about all of them. I thought I knew all of it, but I didn't. I did not understand the nuance and the complexity that that lied under these terms. So I think that when people are being marketed to, or when a term is being thrown around, there's assumptions that are made sometimes, and the full understanding of the intention of the creator is, or the teacher, is not always understood or perceived. So I think it sort of throws a little bit of a wrench into the system. I almost feel that the spiritual path is like that in general, because until we grow our discernment and really cultivate that ability to feel into things and to decide whether or not there's resonance, and even to learn about something before we necessarily attach to something, even the ability to see things with neutrality. Until we have discernment, we can end up in so many different alleyways and traps and paths. And I think usually it's necessary to take all of them and try them all on for size. However, I think that all of that contributes to some of the divisiveness and the division that you were speaking of earlier, too.
Yeah, and to be honest, I feel that the divisiveness is, the biggest issue or the biggest thing to be kind of aware of in spirituality, because when there is, divisiveness like that, that is kind of stepping into a more egoic state, or an egoic place, or even narcissistic place. You did make that point about narcissism and how narcissistic our society is, and I agree there. And not only that, I think we all have some level of narcissistic tendencies, as we are going along. Yes, we can kind of heal and change those things, but I think it's always a little bit present. And I think that's part of the experience as well. Oh, now I'm having one of those, like, you said something in there. I really wanted to get to.
Yeah, sometimes it just escapes and it's like right on the tip of your mind or your tongue. Like sometimes I can feel it spatially, like it's right here or it's right
Yes.
here in my field, but I can't grab it.
I am remembering what it is. But one thing that I like to say about, like, when you get conversations going with people that are, more open, that aren't stuck in those narcissistic tendencies, or that are able to really kind of flow, the conversation itself kind of becomes an entity in the field, and that people are just kind of tapping in as to, like, oh, this is the piece I have to add. Oh, this is the piece I have to add. So I like that you use that analogy of, like, I can feel it in the field, like it's there. Uh, but the when we were talking about labels, and how, when you say something and the audience, different audience members may take that differently. You can both see that as an issue, like as a little bit of a problem. But at the same time, the idea that everybody is going to get what is meant for them out of something that is said. And so maybe that lack of clarity or lack of specificity in definitions plays a role in that.
Mhm.
It's a, that's a weird realization for me that has trouble with definitions and now understanding of like, oh, that could serve a purpose of not having.
Definitely. I love that. 100%. I think that lack of clarity, I think it definitely serves a purpose. And I don't think there's any possible way that we can, everybody's coming into our content or our groups or the space that we hold or our sessions, whatever it may be, whether it's individual or group, everybody's coming in with their own programming, their own preconceived notions, their beliefs, their values that they know about and values that they're totally unconscious of. I mean, everybody has their own preferences. And I don't think there's any way to know with 100% certainty that what we're trying to deliver is going to land with each person in that way. However, I still think that there's typically some magic to it or some catalyst that is going to transform something within them no matter how it's perceived. And perhaps the original intention or meaning isn't going to land until later in a person's journey, or perhaps they'll have an epiphany later that, oh, this concept is multifaceted, this is multidimensional, there was a deeper meaning to this. But I really think that's the nature of this path in general. Everything is so multidimensional. There's videos, there's even videos that I've made, topic or talking videos that I'll go back to and look at with a completely different lens now. But even like with teachers that I love or speakers that I like to listen to, whatever it may be, as I grow, I go back with a completely new lens and a new filter, and I find something, or in a book even, I can find something that I would have completely missed or completely misinterpreted, or the meaning and the interpretation worked for me at the time and it served its purpose. And now, just like a trench coat or a jacket, I'm going to take it off and try on this new one and go through this next phase of my expansion and see what this has to offer me. Try on something a little bit different, you know? Um, so yeah, while I feel like that, like you said, that divisiveness can be detrimental, I think ultimately it serves a purpose and it is sort of factored into this reality and this experience and the nature of it, given that everybody is coming from a unique perspective is basically what was popping into my mind there.
It's so true though. I even like you say, I totally relate to the whole something that you ran into, a year ago or whatever. It meant one thing at that point and it means something completely different. And maybe that kind of speaks to the point of like the purpose of the differences in understanding. And I love that you bring up dimensionality because that is there's a lot of ways to look at the word dimensionality and what that is referring to. But one thing, when I kind of go on my rant about words or titles, sometimes I will, something that I will bring up is that we are tapping into higher dimensional energies, higher dimensional frequencies, ideas, and we are trying to bring them down to a three-dimensional concept so that we can understand. And if you were to look at things from a higher dimensional perspective, part of the realization for me is that there's far more interconnectivity and less like defined rigid boundaries. It's part of the reason why I like to use the term frequencies or energies because it allows a little bit more spaciousness to the ways that things can be interpreted. At the same time, though, another thing that kind of came up as we were talking about this and the ways that we can discuss different methods or convey different messages, right? Is there's an importance to that, like that it speaks to why there isn't competition really in the spiritual and the teaching realm, as you can you and I can be talking about the same thing. You say it in your way, I say it in my way. And somebody may have no idea what I'm talking about, but completely resonate with the way that you say it. And so I mean, to me, that right there is, again, kind of leading into the whole not putting so much importance on, like, ooh, I'm worried about how this can be taken, or is somebody going to understand the depth of what I mean, when I say this, but to deliver things in a way that allows for people to understand it from the level that they are at the time that they receive it. And that may change, and there's a beauty in that. And that's something that I've had to kind of come to grips with, and maybe you have too, in that a lot of times things that I say, like, I feel like I'm not necessarily parroting somebody, but that I'm saying things that have already been said in a different way, and coming to the realization that it's how I say it, or the fact that, how that comes through to you, that perspective that you bring to it, that is the important part, and that will allow more people to connect with it. Because in truth, nothing's really new. It's all there. It's all existent. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So I guess that can be a little bit of encouragement for anybody who's nervous about stepping into it. Like, we need all the voices. We need all the
Definitely. And I
voices.
think that there's some things that, let's say you bring to the table, for example, that somebody can only receive that truth on that level from you. You, Leb, you're delivering, perhaps, if it's a truth that, or a concept or whatever, that's, first of all, like you said, there's nothing new under the sun. It's all in the collective, and we're all pulling from this field. And I think that a lot of these concepts that sometimes want to be expressed are expressed at the same time through many different voices. And those individuals that receive them from each source, they can only receive it through that individual, whether it's a certain characteristic about them, or they represent something familiar to them, but
Mm-hmm.
they're receiving that meaning or that transformation in a very specific way. Where if one of those individuals who was supposed to receive that truth from you, or from your energetic signature, if you will, were to go over to Joe or Jen or something, um, they wouldn't be able to receive, they wouldn't be able to accept, and it wouldn't have the same impact. I truly believe that the same truth can have a completely different impact depending on the messenger. And I think that's really important to understand, like you said, from an aspect of there being no competition, but also from the aspect of, I have this stuff that I want to share, but I don't know that there's room for me here, or I don't know that I can bring something new and exciting to the table, or I don't know. It's like, no, all you have to do is be yourself. Hey, Bubba. All you have to do is be yourself and be authentic, because your audience can only receive that thing from you. Your energetic signature, your makeup, all the elements that make you up, that is going to be like this very unique delivery system that can only be absorbed by another certain energy. And if that energy were to try to entertain that through someone else, there would be a disconnect. So I really feel that that's how it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I I love that. I it also kind of brought up an idea that I've heard, I believe, from Bashar, is that if you are feeling called to share something, that is a guarantee that there is somebody out there that is waiting to receive it,
Mm-hmm.
waiting to hear. And that's just that right there could be a very empowering concept.
Right. And sort of like that concept, what you seek is seeking you in a way too. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. That's again another way to say to say that truth. We examples
Definitely.
right there. Um, we did you notice how we came very nicely full circle there, and we got back to taking up space and uh,
Oh, yeah. That's pretty awesome. I feel like this
I,
conversation has gone in so many different directions with so many branches, yet it's also had this beautiful cohesion to it. Like it makes sense. Everything, I thought it was beautiful how this has unfolded. I don't know.
it, it has had a lovely flow,
Yeah,
lovely flow.
definitely.
Um, I do think that we are going to maybe end it there because we got this nice like circle thing go. I don't know, we circled back. I love that. So I want to take a moment to thank you again for being here because this has been a wonderful, lovely conversation and experience. Um, if actually, would you like to take again just to remind people who you are, where to find you, those kinds of things?
Definitely. So you can find me on my YouTube channel at Viafrequency or my TikTok at Viafrequency. And if you are interested in exploring private work with me, I also do hold some group opportunities on Zoom. I haven't in quite a while, but I'm going to probably be revisiting that soon. So I have a few different options of ways that you can work with me, even individually. But all of that information can be accessed on my website, which is just viafrequency.com, viafrequency.com. And you can visit me on any of my social media platforms, or if you have questions for me, you can always feel free to reach out via email. And all that information is on any of those platforms or on my website too.
Excellent. And I will do what I can to get that information in the descriptions for this podcast episode. Um, this has been an absolutely wonderful episode. Thanks to all of those out there that are listening. I appreciate you. If you want to connect with me, I will have that information in the description as well. I also have a Discord where you can find me on TikTok and YouTube and other places too. Um,
I might have to download Discord. I don't have Discord.
it's an underutilized app
It's
for
like
the
Telegram.
purposes like what's that?
Is it like Telegram sort of? Or no?
I'm not familiar with Telegram.
Okay.
It's it was originally made for I believe for gaming, and so that people that game together could kind of come and share communities, but it has a lot of potential for community for building a community space. It's difficult to build a Discord community because it doesn't have like an algorithm. It doesn't like share you out to anything like that. But it's a beautiful space to have people in that you can have different chat channels, different subjects, different rooms. You can have voice rooms and video rooms and all that kind of stuff. So it's a wonderful thing to check out. And mine is named the same as the podcast, The Consciousness Collective. Uh, and yeah, so from there, thank you guys for being here. Thank everybody for being here. Thank you, Olivia. And we will catch you on the next one.
Thank you so much for having me, Lev. This was an awesome conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.